you're 59 years old and you and your spouse have saved $750,000. And you're sitting there and you're wondering, can we transition into retirement? And how can we have confidence in order to do that? So in this video, I'm gonna cover the framework that we use to help people analyze a scenario like this to really help them determine, are they in a position that they can call it quits and move on to this next phase of life? So let's start with the actual sample client that we are dealing with here. Now, I'm going to walk you through something we call the Statera blueprint as we go through this framework, but let's go to the actual scenario. Now, for this example, we're going to call them Jeffrey and Sherry. Now, Jeffrey and Sherry are both 59 years old, and ultimately, we've got $50,000 in cash. We've got $500,000 in Jeffrey's 401k. We've got $100,000 in Sherry's IRA. And then Jeffrey also has a Roth IRA that has $100,000. In addition to that, they have a home that's paid off that's worth $800,000. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna walk through this scenario and ultimately try to walk you through what are the things that you need to be thinking about and planning in order to really have that peace of mind that you can move on to this next phase of life. Now, we do have to look at what their potential income streams are as they currently stand. So Jeffrey's Social Security at full retirement age, and everyone has a slightly different full retirement age based on their date of birth. So for these guys, their full retirement age is age 67, and Jeffrey would receive $26,880 a year, and Sherry would receive $18,036 at age 67. Now, in addition to that, they also are going to be receiving a pension. So Jeffrey is also going to get a pension from the career that he's had, and that will pay him $12,000 a year starting at age 65. So all of these things are important as we start to kind of build out this framework and see how does this all come together. Now one of the things, and this is probably one of the least exciting things that you can get into, but we do have to get into what does our lifestyle budget look like? And so one of the things that I would suggest is, take a look at your finances, and you may be sitting there thinking, okay, we've been working our whole lives, and we've been saving money, we've had to pay probably higher taxes, and ultimately, when you move on to this next phase of life, it's going to be a lot different from an expense standpoint. And so what I would suggest is you just start with your basic expenses, and those are going to include things like your utilities, how often are you eating out, groceries, all the basics of living, car and home insurance, things like that. And then I would also add into this equation, what does the fun expenses look like? So are you going to be traveling a lot? Do you just have expensive taste? What does that look like? You have to map this out and say, this is what it is going to cost to live the lifestyle that we want to live in this next phase of life. Now, as a little pro tip and as a side note, it's pretty reasonable that you won't fully know until you've been living that phase of life for a couple years, but it'll reduce the amount of error you have by thinking this through and talking it out and giving yourself some type of number. So in this case, in this scenario, they came out to where their annual expenses were running at about $66,000 per year. Now that's roughly $5,500 per month that Jeffrey and Sherry thought they would need on a monthly basis to cover their lifestyle and the basics that they want to do in this next phase of life. Now, in addition to that, we have to keep taxes separate because taxes are going to always change, and based on your income, that'll change. And so it would be unreasonable to throw in a flat amount because it might throw you off. So think of it in terms of two different amounts. What does it look like to live? And then you can start to ask yourself, and on top of that, we probably need some money for tax. So in this scenario, the $66,000 or the $5,500 a month is really totally dedicated to the basics, not to paying taxes. So taxes, we're gonna need more money, and I'll show you how that all comes into play. Now, another thing to think about, we're not saving any money anymore, right? We're not saving for some future time. This is the future time. So sometimes people forget when they start looking at their expenses, what that looks like. So let's go into our framework that we use as we start to break this down. Now, ultimately, we use something we call the 6 pillars of impact. And think of it in terms of these are 6 key areas that we think everyone needs to analyze and check off a list in order to really have that confidence to move to that next stage of life. Now, for this video, we're really going to hammer in mostly on an income plan. We'll talk about modeling a wealth allocation plan, and we're going to talk a little bit about taxes. These other 3 we won't go deep into, but they are important that you should touch on these as well. And just as a high level, these other 3 that we won't cover in this video, you just need to know if you go into a facility, what is your plan? Do you want to buy long-term care type insurance? Do you want to self-insure? Whatever it is, you just need to know what your plan is. Then on top of that, you just need to make sure you've analyzed your insurances and that you have proper coverage, and make sure you get good coverage in your Medicare supplement plans, etc., things like that. And then just make sure that your estate plan is in order. One of the worst things that we've seen happen is upon the passing of a couple, their family just all breaks up because there was a lack of understanding, and ultimately that's the last thing that most people want, is to cause problems. So just have this all clean. Make sure that whatever you have when you passes to the people that you want it to pass to, or the charities or the organizations. So let's go through, we're just going to kind of go through one of these at a time. So we're going to start here on the income plan. Now this gets kind of interesting because ultimately we have to kind of look at what are the basic levels of the income plan. Now, here is something that I want you to take a look at. So for this sample couple, what you'll notice is, if they retire and they're 59 years old, and we've got $66,000 of living expense, well, and we don't have any income, right? Because their Social Security hasn't started yet, their pension hasn't started yet, and so we're short the full $66,000. Now, in this case, there's no tax due because we're not showing any income. But this $66,000 has to come from the investments. And so you'll notice, and we're going to inflate that every year, we're going to make it a little bit more, right? And so one of the things that happens here is there is some tax due as we move forward, and that's because we're taking money from accounts that produce taxable income. And so that's important to know, that we may only need $66,000 out of the gate, but because of taxes, we need $75,000, then we need $78,000 and inflation, and then it just keeps going up. Now, eventually, as we move out along this spectrum, we get out here to age 67. And at age 67, we have some Social Security that started. We have a pension that started. Now, this pension does show slight increases for inflation. And so you'll notice when we get out here to age 68, we've got $56,000 coming in from Social Security because both Sherry and Jeffrey have their Social Security kicked on, as well as a pension. So now we have $70,000 coming in. We don't have to pull a lot from our investments from that point moving forward. We have to really look at this at a base level right out of the gate, because this is part of building out our income plan. Because what happens, I'm going to show you a chart here, and this is as it pertains to that $750,000 that they've saved. You'll notice that the money starts high, right? But because we have no income, it really comes down pretty quick until finally here it starts to level out. Now, why is it leveling out? Because all of our income streams have finally kicked on. And so you'll notice the blue line represents their investments, not their house. So anything that can actually be used for income. And so what happens is their investments slowly start to come down over time. But do we make it? We make it. I don't love this picture because it is a little bit tight. And so ultimately, what are the things that we can do to start to alter it and provide more confidence? Now we made a couple little tweaks in this sample where, and I'll get into it here in just a minute, but I want you to see we made just a couple little tweaks specifically on our tax plan and on our modeling our wealth allocation plan, and that I'll go into. And you'll notice the green bars represents the effect that those decisions could potentially have. And so you'll notice, this particular sample client would have a lot more confidence knowing that instead of having $139,000 left out here at age 95, they could have $410,000 potentially. And so what did we do to make that little tweak? So I'm gonna get into that with you. So ultimately, folks, as you map this out, you really need to be thinking, okay, if I'm not making income, how do I get income? And so this is where modeling, and I'll just show you here. So this second step of the process is modeling a wealth allocation plan, which is really, how do I take the $750,000 that we've accumulated and position it in such a way that it helps us to sleep well at night, it helps us to provide an income for us to live a lifestyle, it gives us confidence that we have enough money for emergencies, and at the same time, we have confidence that we can keep up with and outpace inflation, at least on some of the money. So this particular piece it's a little bit complex because there's a lot of moving pieces there. But I'm just gonna give you a high-level idea of what this might look like. So one of the ways that we start to model this out is we use something we call a fiscal house. Now, you can watch one of my other videos where I walked through an example of building out a fiscal house. And in this one, I'm just gonna give just a kind of a quick overview. But I want you to think of it as a fiscal house has three components. You've got the foundation, you've got the walls, and you have the roof. Now, the way that we view this is we say to ourselves, okay, money set aside, and think of this as purpose. What is the purpose of the money that we are putting aside? So if we have money in the foundation, what is its purpose? Its purpose is to be safe. It's part of the foundation of our overall fiscal house. And so it's important to have for many reasons, including emergencies, peace of mind, all of the things that are kind of at our core. So we do have to have some money in the foundation of our home, but one of the big pieces that we just saw is that we don't have income for 5 years, and we really don't have good income in this scenario for more like 7 or 8 years because our Social Security and our pensions aren't all fully on for roughly 7 to 8 years. So as we look at this scenario, what happens is we look at this $750,000 that we have. And then on top of that, we have this roof. Now the roof represents growth. Okay, so our walls represent income, right? Because we just talked about how we need to figure out how we're gonna live a life. The roof represents we need to outpace inflation so that in the future we can continue to live the lifestyle we wanna live. So as we look at these three components, every person who goes through this exercise is going to be drastically different in how they wanna lay it out. But ultimately in this scenario, I think the first thing we have to solve is our income dilemma for the next 7 to 8 years. So we have to do some working backward and say, okay, out of this $750,000, how much needs to be dedicated to income, particularly over the next 7 to 8 years? Now, it's going to be a decent amount of money there, but ultimately we can make it all work. So we're gonna set aside that money for our walls. Then whatever's left, we're going to have a discussion and say, okay, how much of this do we want to make sure we cannot lose? And then the third step would be, okay, well that leaves a certain amount of money left. So in this case, let's just assume that we needed, out of that $750,000, we needed to set aside $300,000 to satisfy our needs for income out of the gate. Well, that would leave us $450,000 that we've got to figure out what to do with. Now, out of that $450,000, maybe some of it comes down here into the foundation, and then the remaining comes up here into the growth. Now, the reason this is so important, folks, is if done properly, I want you to think about this in terms of purpose. So if our emergencies and the unknowns are covered, and if this is our sleep well at night money, and we also have money set aside that's going to cover our income needs so that we can live the lifestyle we want to live, our hope is that there's like this emotional wall here because we've got the basics taken care of. And the hope is that we can now invest money up here and not be worried about it all the time, which also means it might be a thing that you can actually invest a little bit more aggressively with the portion of money that's up here because all of this has been taken care of. Now, in the example that I built, we built it on this framework where we took a little bit of the money and we said, okay, we are going to get a little bit more growth on that money. And the way we're gonna do it on top of that is if we want the most efficient growth, What type of growth would that be? Well, it would be tax-free growth, right? So what we would want to consider doing is investing our Roth IRA monies a little bit more aggressively, because that is going to make an even bigger impact on the full picture. So let's go back to the scenario. So really, in this piece where we got all this extra value, we really just did two things. Number one, we did some Roth conversions. Now, that is a discussion for a whole nother video, but the Trump tax cuts of 2017 are expiring in 2026. So we believe, it's our thought that it's very likely that taxes are at a lower spot in history, and that we think over time it's probably going to go up, right? Now, take that overall framework and then apply it into this scenario. Well, they have no income for a period of time. And so what we've done is we have taken their Roth IRA and we have slightly increased its aggressiveness to get a little bit more return. And then on top of that, we did Roth conversions all of these years where they are not showing any income, which is perfect, right? Because we are taking money out of IRA money at a low tax bracket and moving it into a Roth IRA that will then, over time, have tax-free growth. And so, folks, as we look at this, we have a tremendous amount more confidence knowing that not only do our assets not slowly go down, but they actually slowly increase. And what we haven't really talked about is if for some reason you end up having all this money upon passing, if Jeff and Sherry did, well, that even adds to the overall estate plan, because that money passes even more efficiently as well. So folks, in this example, and we could have made this look even better, but we just wanted to show the basics of 4 years. We just did a conversion for 4 years is all, from IRA to Roth IRA money. And between that and simply kind of changing our overall perspective on how we invest the money, it allowed us to have all this extra value over the lifetime of your life. Now, as we go back to kind of the 6 pillars of impact, we've essentially built out our income plan. We have built out our wealth allocation plan. And on top of that, we have used some tax minimization strategies along the way. Now, if you want to get into detail on some of those other things, watch some other videos where we'll go in depth on each one of those as we break them down. I hope this video has been helpful. And if it has been, please like and subscribe and share with your friends and family.